There are truths that arrive late, and it is precisely those late arriving truths that carry enough weight to collapse an entire life. For the narcissist, the moment they finally realize that they have destroyed the one person who loved them with a sincere heart is not gentle, nor is it a beautiful repentance like in fictional stories. It is a psychological earthquake, a fracture that exposes the part of themselves they have spent their entire life trying to hide, the emptiness within their own soul. The narcissist always believes that loyal love is something that will remain forever. They assume your endless tolerance is truly endless, that your sacrifices are instinctive, that your heart will always return no matter what they do. But real love is not a prison. It is not an inexhaustible supply. It is a rare gift, given by souls with depth, and it is also a gift that can be withdrawn when it has been taken for granted for too long. And when that gift leaves, the narcissist finally begins to see the truth. They have never been able to stand on their own. It was you, your stability, your loyalty, your listening heart that held them up. You were the mirror reflecting their best version, the place where they found the illusion that they were lovable, strong, special. When you disappear, that mirror shatters. And for the first time in their life, they have nowhere left to hide from the darkness Jung called the shadow, the part of themselves they have always denied, always fled from, always projected onto others. It is not that you were not good enough. It is precisely because you were too good that your departure becomes the harshest test their ego has ever faced. You were the last light in their darkened room. When that light goes out, they finally realize they have lived their entire life in darkness. This is not a story about karmic revenge, nor a fairy tale where the one who inflicted harm eventually understands and becomes better. This is a profound psychological journey where we witness a person destroy their only real chance to be truly loved, where we watch an empathic soul break in order to learn how to rise, and where the ultimate truth appears. Love that is not valued will leave, and when it leaves, it takes with it the very piece of humanity the narcissist depended on. In this video, we will step into the moment the narcissist realizes, far too late, that they have lost the only person who ever loved them. We will explore how their ego collapses, how the darkness they avoided consumes them, and why the empath, after everything, is the one who emerges with a soul that is stronger, brighter, and freer. Let the journey begin. Chapter 1. The Architecture of Loyal Love Beside a Narcissist. True love, when it enters someone's life, never arrives like thunder. It often comes quietly like a breeze, like a subtle resonance that allows two souls to recognize each other before the mind even has a name for it. In that journey, the empath, the one with a deep heart, a sharp intuition, and the ability to sense the subtle layers of emotion, is often the one who gives more, feels more, understands more. Christ understands more, and they, dangerously so, are the ones most easily pulled into the orbit of a narcissist, where love and compassion become the doorway into a role they never realized they were stepping into, the spiritual pillar of an unformed soul. On the surface, the narcissist appears strong, captivating, mysterious, and confident to the point of seeming impenetrable. But according to Carl Jung, all that display is not their essence. It is a defense structure called the persona, the social mask one wears to hide the most fragile parts within. When an empath enters their life, that mask suddenly finds a power source to sustain itself: loyal love. You begin by listening. Perhaps it is the stories they tell about childhood, about old wounds, about the failures of previous relationships. You empathize because your heart has the ability to see through their steel armor and touch the fragments no one has ever held with tenderness. You feel called, as if your presence has the power to heal them. And to a narcissist, that empathy is not only comforting, it is fuel. It reinforces their false identity, convincing them they are lovable, worthy of attention, worthy of sacrifice. And so, a dangerous structure begins to form. You become the place where they unload their inner world, and they become the center of your emotional universe. But what makes your love rarer and more precious than anything they have ever received is your loyalty. You stay when others walk away. You are patient when others are tired. You believe in the good within them even when they themselves cannot. According to Jung, this is called the projection of the ideal, when one person sees in another a potential that the other cannot see in themselves. You see them not as they are, but as they could be. You love that potential, that light beneath the dust of their wounds. And that is what makes you irreplaceable in their life. But the narcissist does not understand that loyal love is not a privilege. It is not something granted by default. It is not a sign of weakness. It is the result of a choice repeated every day. You choose to stay, you choose to trust, you choose to hope, you choose to see the beauty in them, even when they insist on showing you their cruelty. You stay in moments when anyone else would have already turned away. And to them, this is not a miracle, it becomes a habit. The narcissist does not realize that to love someone so wounded, you have had to sacrifice much of yourself, your peace, your boundaries, and sometimes even your self-respect. They do not see that every time you forgive, your heart cracks a little more. They do not see that every time they punish you with silence, your spirit curls inward. They do not understand that loving them means you are silently enduring a psychological battle they never valued. In Jungian psychology, this is an unconscious alliance between two archetypes: the wounded child within the narcissist and the healer within the empath. The wounded child wants to be valued, loved, forgiven, recognized. The healer wants to feel meaningful, impactful, capable of saving someone. But it is an imbalanced alliance because one side consumes and the other gives. When love flows only in one direction, it is no longer connection, it is depletion. But your heart, because it is loyal, does not see it that way. You interpret their anger, withdrawal, coldness as signs of wounds that have not healed. You treat their indifference as fear of abandonment. You justify their cruelty with soft inner narratives. They don't mean it. They're scared. They need me. And that is how your love becomes a shelter that enables them to remain unchanged. You hold the emotions they refuse to face. You carry the pain they cannot name. You become the mirror reflecting the best parts of them, even better than they truly are. At a deeper level, according to Jung, you become the carrier of their shadow, the one who holds their darkness for them. You soften it, reinterpret it, rationalize it. And when you do that, they no longer need to grow. They no longer need responsibility. They no longer need to self-reflect. Because you are carrying the hardest part of their psychological development for them. You become the place where they feel safe not to grow up. You become the cushion that prevents them from feeling the weight of their own behavior. And gradually, they take it for granted. This happens silently, little by little. First comes gratitude, then expectation, then entitlement, then contempt for you for being too tolerant, then the certainty that you will never leave. This is the point where loyal love becomes distorted into something they believe is their right. And when love becomes a right, it is no longer cherished. Your loyalty, the most precious gift one human can offer another, slowly fades into a backdrop they no longer see. They begin to believe that you will always be there, that you cannot live without them, that you will forgive again and again and again, that you will bend yourself to fit their selfishness. They mistake your endurance for infinity. But loyal love is not born to survive in a place without psychological maturity. It cannot continue when suffocated by ingratitude, disregard, and carelessness. A tragic paradox unfolds. The rarity and sincerity of your love makes them assume it is easy to find, not because it is true, but because they have grown so accustomed to it that they have lost the ability to recognize its value. While you quietly carry exhaustion, they increasingly believe you are here because you cannot leave, and thus the architecture of what was once a beautiful love begins to warp. It becomes a dangerous structure. You are the single supporting pillar, while they place the full weight of their insecurity, wounds, narcissism, and need for admiration upon you. But a structure with only one pillar cannot stand forever. And one day, you can no longer breathe. You feel yourself shrinking within the very relationship you once believed was destiny. Your soul feels drained. Your inner voice grows faint. Your boundaries blur. That is when the first crack appears. Not in your love for them, but within yourself. And ironically, the narcissist does not notice. They do not see you dissolving. They do not see you exhausted. They do not see that every sacrifice is a cut to your soul. They see only one thing: you are still here. And your continued presence convinces them that loyal love is immortal. But loyal love is only immortal when nourished by gratitude, understanding, and responsibility. When it is drained, devalued, neglected, it dies. And when it dies not because it is weak, but because it has been killed slowly, day by day, by the very person who received it. If this chapter could be expressed in one sentence, it would be: they never knew you were rare because you loved them too well. And what they do not know, what their ego blinds them to, will become the greatest tragedy of their story. By the time they finally recognize your value, you will no longer be there to love them again. Chapter 2. How the narcissist slowly destroys the only person who ever truly loved them. The destruction in a narcissistic relationship never arrives like a sudden storm. It comes like a persistent drizzle, like small but steady drops hitting the same spot again and again, until one day you look back and realize your soul has been punctured, and you never noticed when it happened. A narcissist does not destroy you with a single blow. They destroy you at a pace so subtle that you do not realize you are being undone. And that is what makes this journey one of the most intricate tragedies a loyal heart can ever endure. In the beginning, their destruction is disguised as connection. Gentle gestures, sincere words, well-timed care, all of it feels like soft threads tying you closer to them. They create the illusion that you are not only loved, but seen, understood, chosen. But once you are tied tightly enough, those threads begin to tighten, not with immediate pain, but with silent shifts. The words that once warmed you grow rare. The affection that once moved you gradually turns into cold indifference. You begin to notice cold patches in the heart of the person you love. But you don't trust your intuition. You tell yourself they're just busy, tired, going through something. And so you begin to explain their behavior for them. This is the most dangerous moment, when your heart starts doing the job that should belong to them, protecting them from responsibility, making excuses on their behalf. From Jung's perspective, this is the stage where you begin to merge with their shadow, their weakness, chaos, and insecurity. Instead of being confronted by them, start being carried by you in the form of empathy. And when you do that, your collapse begins. The first form of destruction is rarely an action. It is the slow withdrawal of validation. The narcissist knows your heart is sensitive to emotional signals. All they need is to step back 1 inch, and you will come forward 2. All they need is to go silent, and you will fill the void. All they need is to appear distant, and you will use your whole heart to pull them back in. They do not say this aloud, but they see every reaction in your eyes. And from that moment, they begin testing how far they can go before you fear losing them. They try a little coldness, you soften. They try a little neglect, you try harder to please. They try a little criticism, you apologize for things that weren't your fault. Every time you do that, they take note, not to be grateful, but to calculate. Then the destruction enters its second stage, emotional reversal. At this point, any legitimate need you express, the need to be heard, to trust, to be respected, becomes in their eyes a sign that you are demanding too much. You need connection? They say you're annoying. You feel sad? And they say you're overthinking. You are hurt? They say you're too sensitive. And slowly, the emotional truths within you, your inner compass, start to drift. You stop trusting your feelings. You begin trusting their interpretation of you. This is what Jung called possession by the other's shadow. When you begin internalizing the negative lens they project onto you, you are no longer yourself. You become a distorted version, shaped by their perception. This is how they destroy you, not by attacking you outright, but by making you turn against yourself. At this stage, you start apologizing for things you didn't do. You feel guilty when they're angry, cold, withdrawn. You become conditioned to believe that keeping them is your responsibility. Meanwhile, they grow comfortable with a new kind of power, the power to make you doubt who you are. Then comes the next stage of destruction, destabilizing your confidence. A subtle insult, a quiet mockery, a thoughtless comparison, a deliberate indifference, all arranged like drops of acid on the glass of your self-worth. You do not shatter immediately, but you begin to blur. You blur in your own eyes, you blur in your own life. You blur to the point where you believe only they can truly see you. They begin creating a subtle divide between themselves and the world. Everyone else doesn't understand you, isn't deep enough, isn't sensitive enough, doesn't love you enough. Only they truly understand you. Only they are the one. And so, even as they hurt you, you cling to them like someone drowning clings to a torn life jacket. This is the stage where the narcissist reshapes your reality. They don't just hurt you, they rewrite your world so that nowhere feels safe except with them, even though they are the one hurting you the most. The next form of destruction comes through silence as a weapon. Their silence is not the absence of sound, it is psychological interference. It creates instability, making you anxious, restless, self-blaming, eager to fix everything. They know this, and they use it to control you. Each time they go silent, you move closer, not because you are wrong, but because you fear losing the person you love. But the most insidious destruction begins when they make you believe your love is not enough. They tell you you're too sensitive, too intense, too emotional, too connected, too unpredictable, too needy. They once loved these things about you, but once you become a reliable supply, they use your emotional strengths to turn you against yourself. And so, you begin to shrink. You speak less, you reveal less, you become cautious, you fear bothering them, you censor your own heart. But the heart was never born to shrink. When it shrinks, it hurts. The irony is that at the moment you are at your weakest, most disoriented, that is when they feel the strongest. Not real strength, but the strength of standing above the ruins they created inside you. Then the destruction enters the final stage, the cruelest stage. They treat you as disposable at the very moment you love them the most. When you love them deeply, they are the coldest. When you need them, they are the farthest. When you try to reconnect, they turn away. When you hurt, they are unmoved. And when you collapse, they decide to leave, not because they are strong, but because they are convinced you cannot live without them. But they are wrong. Their destruction breaks you. But in the ashes you discover a truth. Loyal love was never meant to require you to destroy yourself. And that realization is the beginning of your awakening and the beginning of their delayed tragedy. Because in the moment they believe they have won, they do not realize they have just lost the rarest thing their life will ever know. A heart capable of loving with its entire soul. Chapter 3. The moment the narcissist realizes, I destroy the only person who ever truly loved me. There is a moment for which no narcissist is ever mentally prepared. The moment they realize that the only person who ever genuinely loved them has disappeared from their life in a way that can never be undone again. Not through a sudden argument, not through angry words, not through a threat to leave like before, but through a complete disappearance. Silent, final, as if the heart that once persisted for them had been pulled out from the very root. This is the moment when they can no longer replay their victim role to convince themselves they were not wrong, can no longer blame you for being too sensitive, can no longer comfort themselves with the belief that your love will always return in the familiar cycle they took for granted. This is the first moment in their life when they feel an emotion that has never existed in their internal dictionary: true loss. This realization does not come the moment you walk away. When you first step out of the spiral, they feel proud. They believe you will return. They believe your love is too deep to let them go. They believe you are acting to get their attention. They believe you cannot live without them. And it is precisely these distorted beliefs that prevent them from seeing the consequences closing in. But time is something the ego cannot control. In the beginning, they replace you with noise, with a new supply, with performance, with the artificial glow meant to fill the void they refuse to look at. But all of that fades faster than they expect. The new people are not as patient as you, not as deep as you, not as enduring as you, not capable of loving with their entire soul the way you did. And when the narcissist begins to see this, the first crack in their persona appears. Jung said that the persona, the polished mask they show the world, is only strong when others reinforce it. You were that person. You were the light that reflected the best part of them, the part they wished were real. When you leave, the mask has nothing left to cling to. It begins to slip, and for the first time they see the part of themselves they despise the most. This realization does not arrive as a logical thought, but as a wrenching twist in the soul. It may happen when they accidentally find something you left behind, an old gift, a message they once ignored, a picture of you smiling at them before things fell apart. It may happen when they look at their current self, empty, disconnected, repeating the same cycles, and understand that you once brought something into their life no one else ever could. It may happen when they hear something you once said, and for the first time understand that you were never weak. You were the last person who still believed they could become someone better. And when that awareness pierces through their defenses, they freeze in front of the naked truth. They did not just hurt you, they destroyed the one heart that ever persevered for them. This is the first time they understand that loyal love is not default. It is a gift. It is a choice. It is a rare blessing they never appreciated. The weight of this realization is so heavy that the body reacts before the mind. A pounding heart, restlessness, the mind squeezed by memories. Memories they once dismissed now return with a painful sharpness. Memories of you sitting quietly, waiting for them to open up. Memories of you crying silently when they were called. Memories of you forgiving them, even when they never apologized. Memories of you staying, and staying, until the day you no longer could. This is the verdict no narcissist is prepared to hear, because the moment they see your value most clearly is also the moment they understand they will never again have the chance to touch it. From a psychoanalytic view, this is the moment the shadow, the darkness they buried, rises with full force. They realize that throughout the relationship, you were the last wall, stopping that darkness from consuming them. You were the only person capable of holding them to what little humanity they had left. When you disappear, the shadow has no barrier, and it hits them with the brutality of truth. They destroyed the only person whose love could have saved them from themselves. The most painful thing is not that no one else will love them like you did. The most painful thing is this: even if someone does love them in the future, they will never love them the way you once did, because you love them with the innocence of a soul unbroken, with the trust of a heart not yet shattered, with a purity untouched by betrayal. No one else will ever love them with that kind of truth again. And they know it, or they will, when it is far too late. This is the ultimate tragedy of a narcissist. They spent their entire life searching for what they once had in their hands, but destroyed before they understood its worth. And when they finally understand, they are left with one suffocating truth. You were the only one who ever loved them the right way, and they were the one who killed that love. This is the moment they understand that some losses are irreplaceable. Some souls appear only once in a lifetime, and some chances, once lost, never return. Everything they once dismissed, ignored, or misjudged now becomes a mirror reflecting the greatest waste they have ever created. This moment of delayed awakening, does not make them better. It only makes them realize that their life veered off course the moment they wounded the only person who ever saw the good in them. And from that point on, they live with one haunting truth. Not the loss of you, but the loss of the version of themselves that only you ever brought to life. You were not just the one who loved them. You were the only person who ever made them feel they could become someone better. And they destroyed that with their own hands. Chapter 4. When the persona collapses and the shadow rises. The moment the narcissist faces themselves. The narcissist's inner collapse does not come from missing a person, but from losing a mirror. The mirror that once held the last fragments of light inside them. When you leave, they do not simply lose a relationship. They lose a psychological structure that was built on your presence. Jung called this structure the persona, the mask one wears to survive in the world. A narcissist does not merely wear a persona, they live entirely through it. There is no stable self behind the mask. Their ego is hollow, fractured, and dependent on the reflections of others. When you were still there, you unconsciously supplied the energy that allowed that persona to stand. When you leave, that energy source disappears, and the mask begins to crack in ways they cannot stop. The first crack appears when they no longer have anyone affirming the narrative. I am lovable, desirable, worth pursuing. You once reinforced that belief through your forgiveness, your patience, your loyalty. When you disappear, the narcissist quietly asks themselves, if I'm so wonderful, why did the one person who truly loved me leave? This is the first moment they doubt themselves. Something the persona hates more than anything. The second crack appears when they try to rebuild the persona using a new supply and fail. The new person cannot feel the loneliness buried inside them, cannot soothe their insecurity, cannot see the light beneath their wounds the way you once did. When the new supply cannot make them feel special the way you used to, they are forced back to the question they fear most. But if I don't deserve to be loved that way? This question directly threatens the persona, forcing them to confront what they have buried the deepest, the shadow. According to Jung, the shadow is the part of the psyche that contains everything a person refuses to acknowledge. Shame, inferiority, fear of abandonment, worthlessness, helplessness. For a narcissist, the shadow is not just a part, it is almost the entirety of the inner world they deny by clinging to the persona. Throughout the relationship, you unconsciously acted as the gatekeeper, preventing the shadow from consuming them by continually stabilizing their emotions, continually reflecting their best parts, continually giving them reasons to believe they were worthy of love. When you leave, that door swings wide open. The persona has nothing left to cling to, and the shadow surges upward like a broken dam. The painful truth is this: a narcissist has no capacity to face their shadow. They have no inner structure to look directly at their true self. They were never taught to take responsibility, never trained to sit with real feelings, never experienced true healing. So when the shadow floods in, they panic. They feel shame when they realize they were loved in a way they did not deserve. They feel guilt when they recall how cold they were to your tears. They feel fear when they understand no one else will ever love them with your depth. They feel emptiness when they realize no one will ever be as patient as you. And the truth cuts like a blade. They destroyed the one thing that ever made them less alone in this world. But the most brutal part of this collapse is not losing you. It is being forced to face themselves. For the first time, the narcissist looks inward and sees nothing but a void. No real identity, no emotional foundation, no intrinsic value, no anchor. They realize that everything they believed about themselves, their charm, their specialness, their superiority, existed only because your love sustained it. You were the electricity that kept the persona running. When you unplugged the cord, the entire system went dark. Many narcissists describe this as an ego collapse, like sitting in a brightly lit room that suddenly loses power, leaving them alone with a darkness they never dared enter before. And in that darkness, they meet what they spent a lifetime fleeing. Their fear of abandonment, their fear of inadequacy, their fear of invisibility, their fear of being seen, their fear that no one will love them if their true self is exposed. This is why they attack you whenever you touch their vulnerability. This is why they pushed you away whenever you came closer. This is why they belittled you when you loved them deeply. Because they feared being seen, because they feared that if you saw their darkness you would leave. But the greatest paradox is this: you did see that darkness, and you stayed. You loved them not because they were perfect, but because you recognize the human beneath the armor. You touched a place within them they themselves never dared to enter, and they lost it in a way that cannot be recovered. When Jung spoke of the integration of the shadow, he meant the moment a person becomes truly mature. But a narcissist does not integrate the shadow. They are swallowed by it. Instead of facing the truth and growing, they become trapped in shame and self-destruction. This feeling traps them in a loop, wanting to find someone to replace you, yet knowing no one can fill your place, wanting to escape the pain, yet being haunted by you, wanting to preserve their old identity, yet knowing it was always an illusion, sustained by your love. This is the deepest psychological punishment they will ever face. They must live with the knowledge that they destroyed the only bridge connecting them to the possibility of becoming a better human being. And no one can build that bridge again. The most painful part is not that no one will love them anymore. The most painful part is that among all who come after, no one will love them with the purity you once did. No one will love them before they prove anything. No one will love them from their authentic core. And they feel this truth in every breath. They lost a love they did not deserve, but needed more than anything in their life. This is the moment the persona dies and the shadow takes over. Not to free them, but to remind them for the rest of their life that they were once loved in the rarest way possible, and they destroyed it without mercy. The Chapter 5, The Inner Aftermath. Emptiness, panic, obsession, and irredeemable regret. When the persona collapses and the shadow surges up, the narcissist enters a phase from which no source of supply can rescue them, a phase of absolute emptiness, a kind of emptiness not born from a lack of love, but from a lack of self. This is the consequence they never imagined they would have to face, because throughout their life they believed that as long as they could change the person, change the situation, change the source of supply, everything would be fine. But your departure strikes the deepest layer of their psyche, the layer no other supply ever touched, the layer that only true love could stir. Emptiness comes to them first as a vague imbalance, as if something familiar that once anchored them to life has suddenly vanished. They do not miss you in a romantic or sentimental way. They miss the feeling you once gave them, the feeling of having someone who saw them, sensed them, held the parts they themselves did not dare to face. When that feeling disappears, their world loses its foundation. They once believed they were the center of every story, the main character in every relationship, the one in control. But now, all those roles become hollow, like a stage with no audience. They stand alone with the outlines of an identity that never truly existed. And from this emptiness, panic begins to grow like thorns. Panic does not arise from the fear of losing you. They had always believed that losing you was not terrifying. Panic comes from the fear of having to face who they really are, something they have never done in their life. They have no skill of self-reflection, no capacity to regulate their emotions, no experience of taking responsibility. They can withstand your anger, but they cannot withstand your silence. They can ignore the words you say, but they cannot ignore your disappearance. Your absence is not just silence, it is a mirror. It forces them to face the fear they have spent their entire life hiding, the fear that if no one loves them, they have no worth. And then obsession begins. Obsession appears in the form of memories they cannot shake. Your eyes when you said your final words. The small sigh you tried to hide. The last time you were so exhausted you no longer had the strength to argue. The moment you turned your back and left without demands or hopes. They are not obsessed because they want you back. They are obsessed because they cannot understand how someone who once loved them so deeply could disappear so completely. They once believed your love was immortal, and it is precisely your definitive silence that becomes the first proof in their life that some souls, once wounded enough, will not return. That obsession seeps into them. It is not love, nor is it mature remorse. It is an obsession with having lost power, lost adoration, lost the mirror that once reflected the most beautiful image of themselves they believed in. And when that obsession is not released, it leads to the most brutal phase, regret. But it must be made clear that the narcissist's regret is not the same as the regret of a mature person. A mature person regrets having hurt another. A narcissist regrets losing something they cannot replace. They regret letting go of the one person who made them feel valuable. They regret having destroyed the only source of energy that ever truly stabilized them. They regret that there is no one left to patiently heal them, no one left to see the good in them, no one left to believe in them more than they believe in themselves. But that regret cannot save them, because it comes too late. The narcissist understands that no apology, no action, no explanation can return them to the starting point, to the place where you still believed in them, still wanted to build with them, still placed your heart in their hands without trembling. And they realize that your loyalty is not something they can win back, because loyalty only exists where there is trust. And once trust has died in a heart like yours, a heart that loves deeply and feels deeply, it does not come back to life. At this point, the narcissist must face a cruel truth. They are not truly regretful for losing you. They are regretful for losing the version of themselves that only you made possible. And that is the greatest loss they will never admit. It is in this realization that the darkness within them rises the strongest. It reminds them that they destroyed the most beautiful thing in their life. It reminds them that they once had a chance to change and refuse it. It reminds them that they did not lose you because of fate, but because of choice. And what suffocates them most is not that you left. It is that you will never come back. No one left to cling to. No one left to manipulate. No one left through whom to define themselves. No one left to mirror them so they can feel like a good person. No one left to hide the void inside them. And from this moment on, they must live under a kind of spiritual sentence. And the sentence of late awareness that they themselves destroyed the only soul that ever saw the best in them, and that they will never again have that in this lifetime. This is the punishment no court delivers, but which their own consciousness will enforce for the rest of their life. And that is the true definition of inner collapse in a narcissist. Section 6. The Empath's Rising, when ashes become the map of rebirth. The collapse of a narcissistic relationship does not only shatter the empath's heart, it also breaks the inner structures they once believed were the foundation of their life. But the paradox of the human inner world is this: some things only bloom after we are forced to face desolation. When the empath steps out of the narcissistic spiral, they do not fall straight into rebirth. They fall into the emptiness of themselves. This is a stage Jung called nigredo, the dark night of the soul, where everything familiar is taken away, where what is rotten is exposed, where the old self no longer has the strength to hold them down. At first, they do not feel liberated. They feel dismantled. They do not feel stronger. They feel stripped. All the unanswered questions they swallowed throughout the relationship begin to burst out at once. Why wasn't I enough? Why did loving leave me so exhausted? Why did I accept so little when I gave so much? These questions are not to blame themselves, but to allow them for the first time to see themselves outside the narcissist's lens. This is the most important moment. The moment they reclaim the power they once gave away too easily. Slowly, the empath realizes they have been living in a distorted reality, one in which their worth was defined by someone who couldn't see value in anyone. Awakening does not arrive in a grand flash, but as a quiet shift in their mind. They begin to believe what they once only said to comfort others, that their heart has value, that their ability to love deeply is not weakness, that their loyalty is not something to be exploited. From here, the empath enters the second phase of rebirth, the stage where they learn to set boundaries. In the past, boundaries felt like a sin. They feared disappointing others, feared being seen as selfish, feared losing love if they said no. But now, after witnessing the consequences of not having boundaries, they understand that a boundary is not a wall, it is a gate. And that gate is only open to those who deserve to enter. When they begin to say no, it feels strange. But with time, they breathe deeper. When they learn not to react to the narcissist's attempts to return, They realize they are no longer easily dragged into chaos. When they see the narcissist's efforts to devalue them and no longer feel pain, they know they have entered a new mental stage. A stage where they no longer identify themselves with their old wounds. In this journey, the empath experiences a new kind of loneliness. But this time, it is not the loneliness of abandonment. It is the loneliness of someone rebuilding their inner house from the foundation. This is a sacred kind of solitude, where they learn to hear their own inner voice without it being drowned out by the narcissist's noise. This is also the moment they face the final truth. They were never small. They were simply standing next to someone who forced them to shrink to fit a frame that was far too tight. When they step out of that frame, they see the true size of their soul. They realize that the sensitivity once mocked was actually deep perception, that the empathy once exploited was actually a natural gift for connection, that the forgiveness once taken for granted was actually a compassion not everyone has. And in this realization, rebirth begins. The empath moves into the stage Jung called albedo, the whitening, the cleansing, when the soul is illuminated by understanding. They understand that love does not mean accepting harm, that kindness does not mean breaking their own boundaries, that loyalty should not be given to someone who treats it as a given. From here, they begin to pull their energy back to the center, no longer scattering it in attempts to save someone who does not want to be saved. And then something strange happens. They become peaceful in a way the narcissist will never touch. They go to sleep without being haunted. They wake up without fear. They look toward the future without the anxious eyes of someone who has been manipulated. They feel again the rhythm of their own being, that rhythm which was once suffocated to match the erratic tempo of someone else. It is at this point they understand that liberation is not about getting away from the narcissist. Liberation is about returning to themselves. And when they return to themselves, the narcissist loses the last power they once held, the power to define who you are. The empath realizes that their rising is not for the narcissist to witness, nor to prove anything to anyone. This rising is a declaration to themselves that their soul is deeper than any wound that has ever touched it. And the most beautiful part is this: when they stand firm again in their new light, they no longer need the narcissist to regret, because maturity shows them that even if that regret comes, it is not for the true love they once gave. It is merely the consequence of the emptiness inside the other. As for them, they no longer live in that void. They have crossed over, and on the other side they see what they could never see while trapped. They never lost their worth. They simply placed it in someone who was never worthy of holding it. Finding themselves again. That is the empath's true victory. Chapter 7. Love cannot live in a place without responsibility. Love, no matter how deep, cannot live on soil that is not tended. It cannot exist in a place where every apology is temporary, every wound is only covered, never healed, where one person carries all the emotional weight and the other only shows up to receive. Empaths often confuse loving with saving, compassion with enduring, hope with clinging. But love was never born to become a container for the parts of someone that they refuse to face within themselves. When a narcissist enters a relationship, they bring with them an inner world that has not grown up. They want to be loved without taking responsibility for the hurt they cause. They want to be accepted without ever thinking about reciprocating. They want to be the center, yet do not know how to stand beside another as an equal. And that is precisely where the decay begins in any love they touch. Because love is not just an emotion. Love is care. It is responsibility. It is choosing to stay and choosing to do better. It is recognizing that your feelings are not an excuse to hurt someone else. It is understanding that love only has meaning when it is built on respect, understanding, and when both people grow in maturity through it. But in the narcissist's world, responsibility is always foreign. They do not take responsibility because they see themselves as the victim. They do not take responsibility because they believe others must endure their emotions. They do not take responsibility because admitting fault means facing their own shadow, the part they've spent their whole life denying. And it is precisely this lack of responsibility that slowly suffocates love. Not through big events, but through small acts of damage, repeated hundreds of times. All the times they use silence to punish you, all the times they smirk at your pain, all the times they call your need for connection weakness, all the times they abandon you at the exact moment you need them most. These behaviors don't kill love instantly, they kill it by forcing you to sacrifice the softest parts of yourself. Your trust, your clarity, your vulnerability, your hope, and then one day you no longer recognize yourself. But what the narcissist never understands is this: love does not die because it is weak. It dies because it is forced to live too long in an unhealthy environment. It dies because it is denied reciprocity. It dies because the one receiving it refuses to grow. It dies because the person you love refuses to see you. They only see themselves. And when love dies, it dies forever. This is the truth a narcissist does not believe until it happens. They believe you will love them no matter what they do. They believe your loyalty is infinite. They believe you will always come back to patch the cracks they themselves created. But loyalty is not an immortal object. It is a living being. It grows when fed with respect and responsibility. It dies when abandoned in the very house it tried to keep warm. And when it dies, there is no miracle that brings it back. This is what causes the narcissist's late collapse, not the fact that you left, but the fact that you no longer love them the way you once did. They feel that difference like a cold wind cutting through their fragile ego. They realize that love is not something they can manipulate to control, not something they can call back with a few empty promises, not something they can keep with control. Love only stays when it is respected. And they did not do that on a deeper level. Jung said that love can only exist when two true selves meet. Self, but in a narcissistic relationship, only one side shows up as a true self. The other only brings a persona. One opens their heart, the other builds walls. One listens, the other defends. One grows through pain, the other avoids pain by creating it for someone else. Two souls cannot truly meet under conditions like that, because love does not only require an open heart, it requires a heart willing to be responsible. And when the empath finally realizes this, they are no longer angry. They simply understand that love cannot live in a place without responsibility, just as a seed cannot sprout in rotten soil. And when they understand this, they put down the pain, walk away without looking back, because they know their leaving is not a failure. It is an act of protecting their soul. As for the narcissist, they are left with the truth that love died in their hands, not because it was weak, but because they were not mature enough to hold it. And this is the final tragedy. When they are finally ready to love in a mature way, the one person they want to love is no longer there. When the story between you and the narcissist comes to an end, the most painful part is not the separation itself, but the moment you look back and realize how small you once made yourself in order to fit inside the heart of someone who could never love you fully. But it is from that moment that the deepest journey of your growth begins. You thought they had taken the most precious parts of you, your innocence, your trust, your ability to love without armor. But in truth, they only stripped away the parts that were meant to fall off, so you could step into a more mature version of yourself. What you ultimately reclaim is not justice for the old relationship, but a truth you were never calm enough to see. You were never somebody's lesson. You were a gift they were not mature enough to keep. And in the universe of unhealed souls, that gift will always be underestimated. But in the world of those who have walked through darkness and found themselves, that gift is something nothing else can replace. When the narcissist finally understands that they destroyed the only person who ever truly loved them, that is no longer your story. It is their story, the story of a soul that chose to avoid responsibility, to hide its shadow, to feed a false ego instead of the true self. You, on the other hand, walk away carrying the light they were once bathed in, a light they could not keep because they never learned how to cherish it. Jung said that healing happens when a person reunites the parts of themselves that have been split apart. And that is exactly what you are doing. You're reclaiming your selfhood from the fragments of a love that was never reciprocated. You no longer seek validation from the place that wounded you. You no longer try to save someone who does not want to be saved. You no longer use your own brokenness as a measure of your worth. You understand that your departure was not a failure. It was the bravest act your soul has ever carried out. And then one day you will recognize this strange truth. They never actually destroyed you. They only destroyed the version of you that had to strain to carry others. The version that had to suffocate its own voice to maintain an unhealthy bond. From the ashes of that old self, a new person emerges. Stronger, clearer, more boundaried, and more aware of their worth than at any other time in their life. While the narcissist remains stuck with the knowledge that they destroyed the one thing that could have saved them from their own darkness, you move forward, carrying the most precious lesson. True love will never ask you to destroy yourself to keep it. And when you find a new love, a mature love, grounded in responsibility, where both lift each other up, you will understand that the narcissist was never your ultimate loss. They were the doorway, leading you to a better version of yourself. When the screen fades and you take a deep breath, remember, your healing journey is not about forgetting the narcissist. It is about never losing yourself again. And if there is one thing worth carrying from this story, it is this. Your heart was never weak. It simply chose the wrong place to lay itself down. But now you have taken it back, and in that reclamation, you become someone the narcissist will never be able to reach again.